happy to be back in the, I'm going to say saddle, but it's like the Trandom bicycle from the Goodies, or...
Are you suggesting we're about to ride this podcast into a lake, Tennant?
Maybe. And that, like, any paper, anywhere, anytime, we will talk about it. But unlike Tim Brooke Taylor, I am not wearing Union Jack underwear, I promise.
Today, at least.
I am not now, nor have I ever been a Union Jack underwear wearer.
Patreons, right. please send in your guess for which Goodies character each of the LMSU crew would be.
I thought you were going to say we would record a special bonus episode revealing what underwear Tennant is wearing.
Oh, God. That's your OnlyFans content, and I'm not getting involved in that.
That's right.
This is Let Me Sum Up, your regular deep dive into recent books on climate and energy. I'm Luke Menzel, recording on Wurundjeri land, and we are kicking off 2026 with our long-awaited Summer Book Club. Yes, this special episode of the Let Me Sum Up podcast is dedicated to talking about a book called Existential Politics, Why Global Climate Institutions Are Failing, and How to Fix Them by Jessica F. Green. And to do that talking today, we have Frankie Muscovich, Tennant Reid, and beloved friend of the pod, Alison Reeve. Hey, gang, how are you all doing?
Summery and relaxed. I'm wearing the most eye-wateringly bright garment in my possession from all the way from Brazil. It's a Farm Rio luridly yellow oversized shirt.
I think it's chartreuse. I think that's more accurate. Are you wearing the matching shorts?
I'm not wearing the matching shorts.
Fail number one. This isn't really a summer reading club unless you're wearing the matching set. Outrageous.
This is a good point. Look, we can pause. I can go change.
We're under a certain amount of time pressure.
We are.
Early interest in your sartorial choices.
Yeah.
It's very exciting. This is a trend that will continue throughout 2026.
Well, given
Maybe so.
It's a trend we've had since we launched the pod, I'd say we're just getting back into the swing of things over here. Yes, but did you guys have nice summers? I was on a beach and read the politics version of like maths. In Nikki Savage, I was trying to think how do you basically talk about an equivalent to trash TV for politics junkies, and indeed that's the closest thing I can come to. It was good.
So you did foreshadow that this was higher up your reading list than the aforementioned Existential Politics. Do you want to give us your little potted review of the new Nikki Savage?
Well,
you mentioned? I
feel vindicated on that front. I'm almost, spoiler alert, really glad I read that first. Look, I think for those of us that follow this stuff pretty closely, half of the book was a compilation of her very good columns that I think go in SMH and The Age. So it was a compilation of those, and then I guess she was writing about the outlook for the future. Spoiler alert, it's not looking bright. I think much of that analysis has been tracked all over the place. And even, just today, not that I think we're giving too much attention to the news, the coalition are once more a coalition, I hear.
It's fixed.
Yep.
The future's looking bright.
Yep.
Everything's solved.
I enjoy her writing, and I think there's some useful insights into internal party dynamics for those that don't do that regular reading on the daily. So yeah, would recommend.
All right. Well, there is a firm recommendation on a book that we're not doing on the book club episode we're about to record. Alison, you were the trendsetter that told us you were going to read the book we are covering today over summer, and we were the hapless individuals that jumped on that bandwagon. So why don't you tell us what this book was about?
that feels like some blame shifting there going on. And look, I just want to mention I read at least half of this book on New Year's Day on Murray's Beach in Jervis Bay, which was where they were going to put the nuclear reactor. Thank God they didn't, because it's a beautiful beach. It does not need 1 million tonnes of concrete and 1 million years of waste.
You could have read the book at night without a light, though. It would have been great.
I could have, but I didn't. So this book, look, I had high hopes on the blurb of this book. It sounded like it was going to be something that would give us a new way of thinking about the problem of climate change and the problem of getting action on it. Now, Jessica Green's essential thesis is that the problem of climate change is less about collective action and more about the distributional consequences of devaluing assets. And she kind of makes this really clear. Like, her first chapter is called "We're Not All in This Together." And that's kind of where she's going, that this is an uneven problem. What she means is that emissions come from assets. The ownership of these assets is relatively concentrated. And therefore, any plan that you've got to reduce emissions has existential consequences for some asset owners, which means that they will fight very hard to delay action. And conversely, people who own green assets tend to be more distributed, less well organised, and have fewer resources, and therefore have less capacity to fight back. She is arguing that we spend too much time thinking about the accounting side of climate change and not enough in contemplating the power politics. The three things in particular that she's got a beef with are carbon pricing, offsets, and net zero, which is kind of the trifecta. On carbon pricing, really what she says is that she feels the outcome is not good enough. Emissions are not coming down. And she also has a problem with the politics that, carbon pricing means upfront costs and uncertain future benefits. Offsets, she has the same problem that everyone's got with them, so I won't go any further into that. And with net zero, the way that she kind of characterises this is that it's an accounting exercise and a bit of a distraction from what she calls the real problem of eliminating fossil fuels. Now, one of the nice things about this book is that she doesn't spend 8 chapters admiring the problem and then have a little bit of a hand-wavy thing in the 9th chapter about what to do. She does spend about 4 of the 8 chapters talking about solutions. But really, she's got 2 big things that she wants. She wants reform of international trade and tax and financial institutions to stop tax havens and investor-state disputes. And she also wants industry policy, really turbocharged industry policy, to create green assets and green asset owners and thereby address the power imbalance. Like I said, I was a bit disappointed by this book, and a lot of that was because when I was waiting for the big reveal, like, what's the big new solution going to be? And it turned out it was industry policy. And I'm like, yeah, I've already been doing that for quite a while.
As far as one weird trick to solve climate change go, it wasn't that weird, right? Like, it wasn't that big an out-of-the-box idea that she hit us with at the end.
And, I mean, a lot of this it's not new, right? Like, Danny Roderick's been banging about industry policy since 2009. The idea that industry policy gets you coalitions that favour more action, like, I first came across that in an ANU paper that was published in 2015. I think she's right about some of the flaws in the current approach and not others. And I did find that there were some gaping holes and some straw men and a few contradictions in there. So that's the book. What did you guys think?
Well, all of that and an excitement about kind of creating false binaries, that we have to make a choice between some of these things.
Yeah.
This was False Binaries, the musical. Because if you're not doing existential politics, you are actively thwarting climate change action.
Well, you're either complicating things unnecessarily because you're venal, or you're just entranced by esoteric governance structures, or potentially both.
You're a venal Excel addict.
I have a bell here, and I'm going to ring it every time there's a false binary.
All right. Here's your first one. The idea that traditional or like asset owners of fossil fuel assets are different people than green asset owners. It's a pretty fundamental kind of premise of some of the arguments that she's making, and is promoting, the idea and the need to activate tax and other trade policy to decrease the power and influence of traditional fossil fuel asset owners and grow the pool of green asset owners through industry policy and other things. But in many cases, those are the same people or institutions, like particularly institutional asset owners, who are typically like pension funds that own large shares in companies that have fossil fuel interests and apply, an approach to them that we talk about is framed like stewardship. So the idea that you can pivot companies and those assets to green. She really doesn't take a strategic view of that at all. At the same time, because a lot of the money is pooled in institutions like that, that's where the ownership of green assets is likely to concentrate. So it's kind of like that was the biggest starting false binary for me that sets up some of her later arguments for failure, in my view.
Yeah, I thought she was a little bit confused about different types of assets as well, that there are some where, sure, shifting away from fossil fuels is absolutely existential, right? If you've got an oil platform out in the ocean, there is not really much you can do with that other than make an artificial reef. Whereas if you own a car factory, you can turn that car factory into an electric vehicle factory. Like, it's not simple, but you can do it. And so, I mean, she did at one point try and set up 3 classes of assets, right? Ones that will disappear, ones that will transform, and ones that she called vulnerable assets, which is more like, things that will get knocked about by climate change. That last category, she then just kind of ignored for the rest of the book, which was a little bit irritating. And then those other 2 categories are, like you say, Frankie, often owned by the same people. And even there, she was, I think, a little muddled as well. That sort of, I mean, this is probably one of the things when you work in it as well. Like, sometimes the structure of the ownership of those assets really, really changes. Like, you can see that in the Australian electricity industry at the moment, that we are actually shifting not just from coal to renewables, but to a different ownership structure around those assets compared to what we had before. And that shift has as much effect on who does and doesn't want action and when as the technology change.
Yeah, so there was something like overall, I did not like this book, and I have not felt so consistently angry when reading a book since my book club picked the Da Vinci Code 20 years ago. And all reading that book destroyed that book club. We resented each other so much for being forced by that process to read that particular book. Anyway, so I didn't like it.
Happily, listeners, the Let Me Sum Up crew are still together so far.
So far.
We'll see how we go in the next 35 minutes.
But I do want to recognise a bunch of things in there that are like they are important points or like if we can shear them off from the very absolutist black and white, my way or the highway structure that they're attached to, like they are important points in there and they're important things to keep in mind when we think about public policy in climate. And one of those is that the attitudes of asset owners, the way that they think of themselves and the way that they see their future strategy, like those are really important things. And it was, to your point, Alison, in Australia, the change in self-conception of the electricity sector from a very, well, the less of this climate policy stuff, the better. We're like fundamentally coal asset owners and that's everything else is fiddling around the margins. Like in the course of the 2010s, that sector did reconceive itself because they, in Green's characterisation, they saw an opportunity to convert or started to think of themselves as not a coal-fired electricity sector, but an electricity sector. And that transformation hasn't been completely complete, and there's some coal baron types in there and there's the government of Queensland. But the rethink that they've done is really impactful, and it's how to, like, it's genuinely well worthwhile thinking about how to bring about that shift in consciousness, and those for whom it's not going to be possible to shift in that way. And there's a bunch of other things there. There are some ways that people approach net zero, companies approach net zero, are genuinely annoying, pointless in some cases. There's a lot of pointless fluff in the world, and some of that is the net zero plans of businesses that don't really have anything very directly at stake in it all, or the ambiguity that is part of, I would say actually a constructive part of a focus on emissions and net zero. Like, that does contain an ambiguity, because if your focus is emissions rather than going straight to the technologies that produce emissions, but just we want emissions to go down or to reach net zero or to reach absolute zero, that provides this ambiguous layer where businesses, communities, stakeholders can imagine that change will be a little less severe and extensive for them, because or there's room for many technologies to have a role, or that sort of thing. That ambiguity absolutely can be exploited by people of bad faith, or just the subject of great self-deception.
See the gas industry and CCS, for example.
There can be plenty of that. But, like, also that ambiguity can be quite helpful. It is a lot easier to get agreement to a policy if there's room in that policy for people to imagine that they will not be annihilated in an existential war, whose purpose is to destroy them personally, not to bring about a change in the balance of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And there's a question that isn't really dealt with in this book, except to assert a few times that the politics are much better. There's a question of whether that out and out war footing, we are here to destroy these assets and to ramp up the power of other asset owners, whether that's actually tactically or strategically wise, given that when those existential battles are waged, it does seem like the fossil people win a lot. Like, it's not been a great political winner to say we're just here to destroy fossils.
Which goes to one of her fundamental premises, is like, you know, there's been a creation of this arcane governance and systems and processes around managing tons, trading tons, taxing tons. And because nobody understands it, it's been, you know, incredibly easy for bad actors to get in under the hood and, new to those policies, make them less impactful than they would otherwise be. That's one of the big reasons why she argues that carbon pricing and net zero have been less effective than they might otherwise have been. But then she points to this whole other set of very complex multilateral institutions and systems, largely focused around global tax regimes, investor-state dispute settlement, global trade policy, and argues that that'll be much easier to get, you know, wide-scale substantive reform that is aligned with climate outcomes without interference by those same bad actors. And I don't see why that would be any different.
It really felt to me like the way that we all, and we're all guilty of this in one way or another, right, is we look at that other domain and go, oh, how hard can that be? And it's like, it's, you know, and people do that. Economists do this to the energy market all the time, right? They're like, oh, all you have to do is simply get these things together. And it's like, yeah, that bit that you simple's doing a lot of work there. You know, it's underestimating the influence that exactly the same groups of people would have on global financial regulation and global taxes and those sorts of things.
So this is one of the things that was annoying me the most in the early running of this book, because for quite a while it read to me as if Green's diagnosis is that all this footling ton measurement is being done by politically naive dreamers who just think, oh, if you just have column A and column B in the spreadsheet cancel each other out, then that's it, and it's efficient and it's great, and missing all these issues of ownership and power and interest and how to navigate those things. And that is not true. I mean, you can find politically naive spreadsheet jockeys out there, but there's a rich literature of people coming up with ideas in the carbon pricing tradition for managing conflicts and finding ways to accommodate demands without compromising policy design. Robert Stavins of Harvard University did lots of papers on how you can use the allocation of emissions rights within a cap and trade system to accommodate regional or industry demands, but still have a cap, rather than doing what you might do in a regulatory regime, which is just to grandfather performance for an old facility, in which case you don't get the environmental outcome at all. Now, of course, there have been plenty of real-world implementation problems with different forms of carbon pricing, and Green notes those problems. And every time somebody reviews a carbon pricing scheme and then improves it, she seems to just dismiss that as, and this just proves you can never get them right.
Yeah, I mean, that was I thought it was interesting that she noted that when you look at the published literature, there's masses of literature on how you design carbon prices and very few actual evaluations of the systems, which is interesting in itself. Yeah. Perhaps if we have any academic listeners, this might be somewhere where you could get a novel paper or two. The thing that kept coming to mind, to be honest, was real communism has never been tried. It's kind of real carbon pricing has never been tried. A lot of the failings of carbon pricing are often to do with the fact that, no one has ever done an economy-wide carbon price. Nobody. A lot of the problems she was pulling out were actually problems that were more about poor governance than carbon pricing per se. And I mean, ditto when she got to offsets, she spent a lot of time beating up on a particular offset program in Zimbabwe. And the problem that Zimbabwe has is corruption. It's this is not a problem with offsets, it's a problem with poor governance and corruption. I mean, I guess, I don't know. The other sort of thing I was thinking about with the carbon pricing as well, she was sort of saying, well, you can't see that emissions have gone down, emissions have gone up. Carbon prices can't push emissions down if they don't cover those particular emissions.
Yes.
The EU's carbon price does not cover China's emissions. It is not going to push China's emissions down. CBAM's a kind of a partial way to try and solve that. But it is a little unfair to beat up on the EU's carbon price for not having, quote unquote, worked because emissions in the rest of the world haven't changed.
So I feel like there could have been a more productive direction she could have taken with this, which is critique she was making around where the failings have been on carbon pricing, on offsets, on constructs of net zero. There was some truth in all of the things she was saying there, right? And I also don't think it's wrong occasionally to challenge whether, we're coming at these problems from the right perspective. I think our critique of her piece there is absolutely spot on. None of these things have been implemented in a purist way, but that is operating in the real world. The same thing could be said if we had likely had a focus on, I don't know, using the WTO or sort of international tax initiative as the focal point for managing the climate problem before now. You can drive trucks through various of those regimes and things like that. What I would have loved to see her kind of set out is saying, you know what, it's not wrong to say at a macro level, we're not cracking the emissions thing nearly fast enough. Yeah, there are some deficiencies in the way we're approaching this. And there could have been some really constructive things she said, could have said around, you know, like a preoccupation with really overdoing the accounting piece. And if everyone just managed their scope 1, we'd figure out the value chain emissions, because everyone would be doing the bit that they're directly responsible for. Like, there are things like that she could have said. And she could have said, and by the way, we now need to start putting equal or, you know, just as much emphasis on trade and industrial policy and tax, and because economic policy is climate policy today, and having this conversation over here, like pretending climate is not an economy-wide issue that needs solving, and that core economic policy has key levers we need to be pulling, is also wrong. I just think she could have drawn those arguments together a bit better rather than saying it's one or the other.
Yeah, which takes you back to the false binary, right? Like you know, we need to throw out all the stuff that hasn't been working or hasn't been working quickly enough and do this other stuff. Whereas actually probably what we need to do is get better at the stuff that we're already doing, and then augment it with some of these additional tools. And yes, tax and trade and green industrial policy, you know, all of those things have a super important role to play. And we've talked a little bit on this podcast about, you know, how I think as we've gone through the last couple of decades, you know, if you'd asked any of us 15 years ago, you know, around, you know, what was the preeminent tool to deal with climate change, like, I don't know, I would have said carbon pricing was number one, and then it was daylight. And these days I would not say that. I would say it's an important element of a broader suite of policies. But if you rely too much on carbon pricing to do all the heavy lifting, that's going to be really, really challenging to get where you need to be as quickly as you need to, given the diversity of opportunities and challenges in different parts of the economy.
Can I also respond one bit of that? Like, I think, to be fair, in the last chapter, she does say, look, you know, with carbon pricing, we probably can't just scrap it. It needs to be reformed. And one of the things she said was, a more feasible reform would be to make emissions trading schemes function more like taxes by putting price collars around them, and then prohibiting the use of offsets, banking and borrowing.
And don't have linkages.
And saying that this would mean you had to true up your accounts every year, which is effectively subjecting them to a tax. And I was kind of like, sister, let's just go all the way and just have a tax.
And if you shear them from the, this is a fundamentally terrible policy and all you can do is reduce the harm that the policy is doing, every one of the ideas there, like, I wouldn't necessarily myself adopt them all, but they're serious reform ideas. They are well worth debating. And, like, I thought that was good. So I agree with what you said, Luke, that we should widen the frame and think about the contributions that other policies can make towards climate. I do think we need to be think clearly and have some discrimination in that process, because the stuff that is presented here on specifically tax and the treatment of investors, I think is, whatever its merits in other respects, utterly ineffectual as a climate policy and just a complete distraction if thought of in that way. So the two things that Green is excited about there are the push for a global 15% minimum corporate tax rate and the pulling away from investor-state dispute settlement, whether through reforms to how treaties on that work or countries just withdrawing from treaties on investor-state dispute settlement. And these two things are like tax avoiding businesses and great big multinational companies shoving governments around. These are bugbears of of many people, and particularly people in the sort of anti-corporate left. They love to hate those things. And I am not Mr. ISDS or Mr. Tax Policy, and should be careful about not getting over my skis. But I observe businesses pay tax or dodge tax, whether they are dirty or clean. And that if you are raising the effective tax rate on businesses across the board, I do not see how that has any effect on emissions. I would also note, and this is something that I was so annoyed when this was briefly, explicitly said, I'm just not going to talk about these, but it's so relevant. National oil companies, like nations with national oil companies, retain 100% of the profits of those businesses. Saudi Arabia, not a paragon of transformation to green assets. They have like a little hedging strategy. They're ready for anything, sort of. But like you can definitely have arguments for other reasons about raising more revenue from these businesses. But I just do not believe you're going to get any transformation that way. And ISDS, like if you were taxing the emissions, that's a different story. But if you're just like taxing things more generally or changing the ownership, my next rant will probably be about inequality and its irrelevance.
But I mean, yeah, okay.
Anyway, ISDS is a sideshow. It's a total sideshow.
I mean, on the tax thing though, I mean, one thing that a global minimum tax does do is that it kind of gives you a backstop for if you have a government that's not prepared to act on things like transfer pricing or making your petroleum resource rent tax actually collect some revenue or whatever else. Like it's a thing that kind of acts as a global backstop that allows for governments to pick their battles, particularly if you're an economy like Australia, which is heavily resource dependent and where one sector has an outsized influence for that kind of reason. So I had a little bit more sympathy with it just from the perspective of it as it makes it
could be well worth
easier
doing
for all countries.
For other reasons. I just don't see how it does anything for climate.
I thought they were weird policies to zero in on from a climate perspective. Like, and there were like, you could pick any number of ideas around tax reform that I guess, like, how does she refer to it? Kind of like behind the border. So just like, what are and there are so many examples and interesting things to think about there, where she seems to kind of suggest and take more of an effort to think about from a green industrial policy lens. But it was just weird and kind of disappointing. She didn't want to go there on tax and other regulatory reforms. I think that's actually where you might get a lot more kind of meaningful impact, rather than I agree, Alison. I think like a global tax minimum does like helpfully kind of create a more level playing field, assuming it's implemented.
Well,
as envisioned. But there are just so many other more effective policies that could be looked at in that space that she just didn't touch on at all. That it was really baffling.
And she could have actually linked that more to her industrial policy side as well, because one of the things that she was very silent about is where does all the money come from to do that industrial policy?
Yeah.
Now, I was waiting to have a go at this and she evaded my trap.
Yeah.
Because I was going to go, aha, she's going to say that we need to raise this money to fund all this by getting rid of fossil fuel subsidies. And then I was going to say, aha, the numbers on fossil fuel subsidies are largely made up of not the deemed cost of not pricing carbon on those businesses. But she said, no, it's too hard to get rid of fossil fuel subsidies. Let's just raise effective rates of corporate tax instead.
Which in itself is not easy either, right? You want to do lots and lots of stuff on industry policy. You either have to cut spending, which doesn't help with, if you're trying to sell a benefits now, pain later thing, you're flipping that. Or you have to raise taxes, or you have to borrow more, and that's just pushing all your pain down the road. And I mean, I think this is something and I don't know if you guys are going to do this as an episode, but the most recent Superpower Institute paper makes this argument very well, is that we need revenue, right? We need money, and a way to get that money is to tax the carbon somewhere or tax the fossil fuel somewhere in the chain.
Yeah, having sort of poo-poo taxing carbon, then she is actually quite concerned about revenue going to governments, partly through these tax loopholes globally that she regards as needing to be closed, also partly through payouts that are awarded to private corporations through investor-state dispute resolution processes. There seems to be a broader point about state power and how, the inability to properly tax the profits of these large global corporations and some of these payouts that must be like, a rounding error in the scheme of things, but she's quite exercised about. They're kind of like meaning that states just don't have the capacity or capability to properly engage with these issues. It's a very broad, amorphous point, and she could have linked it to the green industrial policy stuff, but she didn't choose to. The thing I was going to say before was actually just around the thing that I found really frustrating about this book, because it's kind of what I expected to be in there, which is this is called Existential Politics, Why Global Climate Institutions Are Failing. And she kind of only really gets to the UNFCCC like right at the end.
Yep.
Like the preeminent
But she comes in hard when she gets there.
No, she doesn't like it much. But I was kind of expecting kind of more of a like grappling with multilateral processes and the degree to which the wheels are falling off that and how they could, evolve over time.
There's an amazing amount of treating like voluntary corporate net zero pledges and voluntary carbon markets as global climate policy. Like there's it's spoken of. Like there are some distinctions made, but the amount of airtime given to stuff that, like, I don't want to detract from people who are sincerely doing genuinely innovative and important things, but just an enormous amount of voluntary stuff is just not very important. It was most important in inducing, like, voluntary net zero corporate commitments, I think did play a quite important role in 2020 and 2021 in convincing a bunch of governments, like, come on in, the water's fine, to make actually potentially meaningful national net zero pledges and start policies to back that up. But other than that, like, they are not. These voluntary things are not global climate policy really at all.
I did wonder whether some of that might be because she's US, right? Like, she's based in the US.
Canada.
Okay.
You can't ignore the US when you're in Canada.
I did wonder if some of this, because I agree that was a little bizarre to me too, was maybe more of a function of like her perspective and where she sits in terms of some of the more localized politics in that part of the world and things that are given a lot of airtime in terms of noise versus actually, being things that are making a difference of substance.
I was prepared to allow that she might not have chosen the subtitle, that could have just been the publisher.
Well, it made me sad because I think I would love to read the sort of considered critique
I'd love
of
to read that book.
the UNFCCC and the associated processes, and a lot of the ideas that have that are kind of critiqued in this book arise from those multilateral processes. Her main idea is basically not to get rid of the UNFCCC, but to diminish its importance and focus as the locus of global climate politics and policy change. But it's sort of ultimately unsatisfying because it's not really clear, like, I guess that there's a diversity of nodes that will then need to be activated by who exactly, I'm not sure. Like, who is the actor in all of this is something that I really grappled with, like, because it's not really clear who is kind of like giving effect to this grand strategy.
Well, everybody gets to enact it by individually deciding not to bother going to COP and contributing to this colossal waste of time. You and I can enact this year. I don't think we will, though, because we're tragics.
I do wonder if part of her point there around a diminished role for the UNFCCC, like if we're not already starting to witness some of that anyway, right? Like we've been having this conversation over the last little while around the diminishing sort of base of like negotiating text that goes in the Paris playbook, and just that like where the action is increasingly at is like getting on with the doing and the action agenda. So,
which she doesn't mention at all, I think, in the entire book, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, so there would have been actually quite an interesting provocation to think about how you could reorient, this process or coming together. You've got a smaller ongoing focus on things that might require kind of rule setting and negotiation, but actually where the big meaty conversations are, and we saw it sort of meaningfully really kind of take over the show last year with trade kind of, really coming to the fore, are starting to have more focuses with, and maybe you're bringing in your other multilateral bodies that are relevant there that have that kind of trade or industry policy or tax policy. Like I would have wanted to read that book for sure.
I think that's right, because if this is about assets, it's that doing the doing question that really has to be grappled with, not so much rules, because ultimately it does come down to who's got which assets and where are they going to go. Yeah, that's much more that's not really an international negotiation question.
No.
To go in a treaty. It's a multilateral initiative / government joint with industry, whatever initiative.
It's also like there's no time to waste here, right? And so like it's not happening fast enough. And like to the extent that some of these forums can be, and this maybe picks up that concept of climate clubs or something like that, but like where countries are piloting effective industrial policies, like you want to see that multiply. Like if these are things that are happening kind of behind the borders, you want to create the kind of environment for faster uptake of really effective policy mechanisms that individual states can look at adopting, rather than that be kind of outside the conversation, in the multilateral space, and then weirdly focus on, global minimum tax initiatives and stuff that aren't really getting to the heart of the issue.
I need to do, because we don't have a huge amount of time left, I need to do a gallop of things I cannot leave unsaid.
Tenants list of grievances. Number 1.
Investor-state dispute settlement, problematic, but just removing protections for investors may not be the best idea when you need to reduce the cost of capital and the risk premium to get gajillions of dollars of investment in developing countries in renewable energy. And we are seeing in the United States, offshore wind developers get slammed by completely arbitrary changes in regulatory policy.
And then sue on that basis.
Yeah. Now, they're suing under US domestic law, to the best of my knowledge. But like, the issue doesn't, just like with tax rates, it's not just a one-way street. The industry policy stuff, there's some notes of caution from Green on a little more concerned about protectionism than I would have expected, but also like a little too much credulity on other aspects. This is a very like 2024 book in terms of the role of and promise of and the political theory of green industrial policy.
It does take a long time to publish a book.
That's true.
I think this book is uniquely harmed by the fact that its writing clearly straddled the advent of the second Trump administration.
Yes.
Which shifted, the frame that we bring to all of this fundamentally, because the political theory of the Biden administration and the Inflation Reduction Act is you would create these constituencies within red states that would love the local investment that was being poured into their jurisdictions, and that would provide a firewall. Even if there was a Republican administration, they wouldn't dare to roll this stuff back because it would be so politically popular. Turns out, not so much.
No. And now you could also say, like, true green industrial policy has never been tried. And this was just one instance, and the US is a weird apocalyptic hellscape. And it's true that I don't think it's been definitively shown that the political theory of GIP doesn't work. But it doesn't look like a guaranteed dead cert.
It's not a slam dunk at this point.
No. Like, what do you do? Well, I think you say green industrial policy, tools worth thinking about, carbon pricing and counting tons, tools worth thinking about, and whatever you're doing, think about it carefully and be very intentional. That's reasonable. But just like everyone who's not loudly declaring fossil assets must be destroyed, and that's like any opportunity to throw sand in the gears, that's what we'll do, is merely stamp collecting. It doesn't get us very far. My final but one rant is to talk about inequality, because there's a thing here that crops up in a lot of places. It cropped up in a report we did a couple of years ago. I think it is a mind virus that should be inoculated against at all opportunities, which is the idea that you can fight climate change by fighting inequality. Not that there may be some equality benefits from fighting climate change, but just directly focusing on inequality itself will ipso facto help with climate. And the thing that is cited here is garbage work from Oxfam, who do all kinds of wonderful things. But on this front, they are garbage producers, showing purportedly that some arbitrarily large portion of world emissions are attributable to the top 1% of wealthy individuals, which makes people think, it's bloody Taylor Swift's jets that are responsible for...
But it's us.
Well, yeah, it's just they ascribe the emissions of assets to the owners of those assets. You could change the ownership of all of those assets and change emissions not 1 ton. I can count that high. And it's just a non sequitur that relies on people not looking too deeply into the numbers to treat as important. Again, national oil companies are not they were a response to real exploitation of a bunch of countries by international oil companies. Those countries took back their destiny, and they're vigorously producing emissions as directly and indirectly as much as they can. Okay, final rant is CBAM.
Oh, here we go.
What a shock.
I was waiting.
Because, I was going to critique this book for being like, well, somebody's just too excited about their one big idea and they're saying it's the solution to everything. And that's not a sin that I've ever been guilty of.
Pot, kettle, black.
Yeah. But Green is extremely dismissive of CBAM. And I think that she needs to find a way to let CBAM into her heart, as so many people have. Because she's saying, this is just another form of counting tons and it's all very complicated and why bother? It's just bad. But actually CBAM benefits, carbon border adjustment, benefits from exactly the kind of asset-oriented thinking that she's trying to encourage. And it would be worth re-examining in that light, because how do you make green assets reliably profitable when they have a pre-policy production cost that is higher than high-emission steel? How do you do it? You could subsidise them forever, or You could internalize carbon prices in selling prices in the product markets that are involved. How do you change the investability of those high emissions assets? Again, it's like relevant design considerations. So I think that if you don't do the this is the only way to look at anything approach, and you just say, is it well worth thinking about assets and incentives and the future pathways or lack thereof and what that does for, that's great. And just take that view and say, this can add value to all of the policy constructs that we might want to use. I'm done.
So, do we recommend this book to our listeners or not so much?
I wouldn't recommend you buy it because it's very expensive. So if you are curious about it, I would see whether you can get it at your local library. Or you can bail me up and borrow my copy if you don't mind it having scribbles all over it and little exclamation marks and the word no underlined 4 times.
You'll be enthusiastically thrusting it upon the first person that is willing to take it off your hands, Alison.
Well, otherwise it's going to Lifeline for the next book sale.
I think that's pretty definitive.
Actually, no. Sorry, I've just thought because I was going to claim it on my tax, so that means I need to hang on to it for 5 years.
But what if it goes, Alison, to somebody who spent all their life working on carbon accounting? That's not going to be a very pro mental health step.
My goodness. I think I spent 30 something bucks on the Kindle version for it, which
That's pricey for a Kindle version.
It is.
I paid 50.
The algorithm is against you.
Here's the thing. I would say sometimes it's not unuseful to have kind of out of the box provocations, if only to provoke a bit of reaction and thinking about why some of those arguments don't stack up. Because I actually think the counterpoints we've made here are a very good basis on which you could have, a discussion about reform. So
yeah, one of the experiences I had when I was reading it was when she was critiquing net zero or something. I'm like, that argument doesn't stack up. I can think of 3 better arguments against net zero that you should be making.
That's right.
So it does provoke thought, and it is good to be challenged. And none of this stuff that we work on is perfect. And there is a bit of groupthink around some of these issues, which it's always good to stir the pot on. I just don't know that there was the nuance of perspective that I would have hoped to see in this book. But if you find getting annoyed a productive process for spurring your own thinking, then this may be the book for you.
If you're struggling to raise your heart rate as far as your cardio requires by mere exercise, this could be.
Read this book while running on a treadmill. That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, there you go. Existential Politics. It is available on Kindle. You can find hard copies. I guess you ordered a hard copy, Alison, that you were...
Yeah, that was probably why it was so expensive.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to give money to Bezos to get a Kindle version. So
yeah, there you go. So maybe check it out. But we weren't super impressed. We're almost done, but wanted to mention for all you subscribers out there is a special bonus episode which we recorded in mid-January, which provided a rapid reaction to probably the big climate news of the summer, which was the US withdrawal from the UNFCCC. And my recollection, it was a few weeks ago now, but we landed in a surprisingly optimistic place in that discussion.
Somehow.
To find out why, walk... Well, what are we doing?
Run, don't walk.
Run.
Running.
Run.
Apparently.
Run, don't walk, to letmesumup.net. Find the support LMSU button at the top of the page. You can, via that route, access our Patreon. Or if you're in Apple Podcasts, you can, of course, subscribe there and access that sweet, sweet boko. That is our show for today. This podcast was edited by energy professional and podcast tragic Mark Spencer from Here Media Studio. I'm sensing an intervention from the floor.
I was going to ask, even though we're not doing one more thing, if I could do one really quick one.
Oh, sure.
And that is just to say...
Show us up.
there was
A controversial mid-outro intervention from Alison Reeve. I wouldn't do it for anyone else, Alison.
I just want to say, over the holidays, there were some terrible bushfires in Victoria, and there are people in Australian Energy and Climate Land who lost properties in that, who were caught up in those fires. So I just wanted to say that if you have the capacity to donate to some of the recovery efforts, please do. And if you don't, maybe if you're in Melbourne, put a date in your calendar for 3 months' time and go and visit those little towns and have lunch at the pub and buy a copy of Existential Politics in the bookshop if it's there, or the secondhand bookshop if it's there, or the tip shop if that's where it is, because getting money back into those local communities is what will help them recover. So that was all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Well said. That definitely merited interrupting me and my outro, Alison.
Would you like to do the outro again, Luke?
No, it is all good. We'll put a link to where you can donate to that very worthy cause in the show notes. And now our thoughts go out to not just the folk in our community, but all the people impacted by those natural disasters. We'll be back to regularly scheduled programming in about a fortnight, but for now, for Frankie Muskovich, Tinette Reed and Alison Reeve, I'm Luke Menzel. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.